Back when I was 8 in the 1980s, do you believe that? 10% of Australians went to university. Wind the clock a little further forward, now we're talking about upward of 26, between 26 and 30 going. We know that of that 10% cohort, about 90% of them graduate in about 7 years. If you go down to the differential between those two groups, like these are kids who are getting lower ATARs, it goes down to 60%. If you live in the US right now, what do you think the graduation rate is from a 4-year college? Oh, that's a bit tough. It's about 33%, okay? In who graduate and up to in 4 years and up to about 60. About 60% of kids in the US go to college. Right? Do you get a sense of where I'm headed here? It's about where we're headed, right? And that is that we're headed to a much more mass market environment for higher ed. And I really think the first takeaway, the first thing I want to say, is that if we keep functioning the way we are, we're probably headed towards that US model. And it costs $76,000 a year to graduate a student on average in the US. And we're deferring the cost of that to students at a very, very high rate. So US debt now for higher ed is greater than their credit card debt. So you might not care about all those statistics, but I think they're an interesting backdrop. How am I doing? Is it 1.5 minutes? All right, good, thanks, Joy. Is that a university will have to be a profoundly different place, or we're going to end up getting those kinds of statistics. And so my second thing is that that's a profound and very, very large problem. And it says that we need to be substantially different. Now, the area that I'm interested in is how do we make the teaching and learning experience particularly different for a much broader range of students. And that says that a faculty member, because we know from 30 or 40 years of research now that's really the teacher-student thing that is where the action is in terms of really making a difference, that we have to have a professoriate who's capable of responding to a much, much different population. And that's a really, really big problem. And most of our responses to that so far are much more discrepancy-oriented than inclusive-oriented. We set up scenarios where we have grants if you're interested in assessment, we ramp up assessment, and you can go for a grant and you can get that and get some money, and you run a PD and run a conference. People do that, and it sometimes results in what we saw earlier.
30 seconds.
30 seconds? Right, I'm nearly done. Discrepancy-oriented and project-oriented, and really what I'm proposing is that we have to have a much more inclusive, comprehensive change agenda in universities to respond to the order of magnitude of that challenge. And that means looking at everything we do at once and the way those things interact, the way we prepare people, our policies, our technologies, our governance process, the way people get promoted. In a sense, obviously, that's what the project I'm involved in is about. But even if I wasn't involved in that, I'd have to look at the history of change and say, we have to take it on with an order of magnitude of effort that's commensurate with the order of magnitude of the challenge, hence all the statistics at the beginning.
Oh,
how's that?
Just made it. Well done.
Jeez, Joy, you're tough.
Yeah. Would either of you two like to make a comment on that? Don't need to? Okay. Open to general discussion. Any immediate reactions? What do you think of what this guy said?
You get some heads of school who want to be dramatic and they want to really enforce it. And other heads of school are smart enough to understand, in a university such as Charles Sturt, I need a blend of professionalism and academia. And so it comes right back up to those guys right at the top who most probably haven't got their head around it yet anyway.
Well, a lot of the innovation ends up being very, very siloed, as a function of the need to have a model or a process. When I did the project that Joy was referring to in the book, I remember walking across the road with the chairman of the board of this prep school in the United States. And I said, do you want this school to be the best place in the United States for kids who have learning or behaviour problems? Or do you want it to be a highly competitive, traditional prep school? We were engaged in the very early days of a process. And he said, I want to go down that traditional road. I looked at that and said, at least he had the courage not to equivocate. But my point with that anecdote is you have to decide who you want to be. And then you have to be a model, and you go to the marketplace with that in this very competitive environment, with that sense of self. Yeah.
Welcome, Susie. Susie's left us on all of your tables, so don't read it during the talk. Read it after. Okay, Susie's an e-learning educational developer at the School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences at Deakin, and she's conducting school-wide capacity building project. Sounds like something everybody needs. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Joy, and thanks for inviting me to participate today, Francisco. It's a pleasure. So I'm talking about digital literacies. What is that we're talking about? What are the practices that the internet allows and accelerates? What digital literacies are required to participate, collaborate, learn, and produce? I guess my talk is going to be focused on how we might keep the promises we are prepared to make in a way that empowers academic staff rather than introduces compliance. Certainly. So on page 3, you can look at the booklet if you like. It's an illustrated guide to the talk. On page 3, I've started to map a framework for my place, my institution, my colleagues, around digital literacies. So what is digital literacy in your place? How is it understood? How is it performed? How are they learnt and how are they taught? And how do academic knowledge practices intersect with internet cultural practices on page 4? How do we, schooled in traditional academic practices, as Tony talked about, how do we participate in a world where reputation is more important than qualifications and where shared ownership is a more highly respected form of knowledge production than individual authority? And where communications that consist solely of text have limited reach and shareability. And the value of something is determined by its usefulness. So if we look at learning on page 5, learning modes are also shifting. The connectivity and speed of the internet have dramatically impacted on how our students communicate, work and learn. This is clearly obvious. With content accessible anywhere, anytime, the teacher is no longer the sole holder of the disciplinary knowledge. Pedagogical practices that position teachers and students as partners in learning are finding purchase. As Sandra talked about this morning, colleagues at Deakin and in your places too are using PBL and TBL, IBL and self and peer evaluation and inviting their students to design their own assessment tasks and rubrics. And how many of our colleagues have the motivation or the skills or the knowledge to facilitate learning rather than teach in these ways? And look, to illustrate how internet culture has shifted my own academic practice, on page 6, I've shared some of the resources that have informed this talk. In a social bookmarking platform called Scoopit. Is anyone using Scoopit? So my resources aren't stuck away in my favourites folder on my computer. They're out there on the internet for you to look at and to share and learn as I learn. You can comment on them and contribute to them. And I'll keep curating that collection over time. So what have I done about this issue, this problem? In 2012, to foster a digital literacy and a learning culture at a school level, I developed a 6-week program of online modules in digital identity and security, connection, curation and creativity. That's on page 7. Many staff undertook the program in the school. We've got 100 academic staff watching TED Talks on education, talking about their teaching, thinking about their teaching practice in relationship to digital literacy, and taking their first steps in some cases in developing their online presence and connection with others. So then in 2013 and 14, we built on this growing digital literacy and the confidence and culture shift that came with it. So I worked with the teaching and learning leadership and our academics, many of them highly innovative, to foster e-portfolio thinking, visual literacy in relation to editing and filming video and using infographics. And thirdly, now we're working on producing e-learning materials with Articulate Storyline, which is a professional e-learning authoring software. This is lots of academics doing this as part of their normal practice now. So the strategy was really just immersion with support. And the framework, beg your pardon, 30 seconds, yeah. The framework to support these innovations are outlined on page 8 and 9. The key elements were aligned and supportive leadership. This was vital. collaboration and the formation of learning teams, exactly as Tony outlined. And George Seaman's work on systems theory and connectivity was vitally important there. And provide the opportunity for people to consult to me about the program and critically evaluate what we were doing, so that was a shared ownership. So now we have 67 staff on Twitter, 3 school blogs, staff making and editing videos for their teaching and research, and training over 20 staff in e-learning software. So these tools each have their own cultural practices and languages that challenge academic practices. These take time to learn. So what's happening in your institutions? Given our location, are we testing the waters? Are we plunging in? Or are we drowning? And what is happening to capacity build staff for both their lifelong learning and to help our institutions keep the promises that we have made that we're happy about making in relation to digital literacy and students learning with technology?
Thank you. Caroline Robinson from Charles Sturt Community Health. It was just something you said really at the end there that captured me, and it was about staff engaging in Twitter and something else and learning skills to make videos, and exhaustion just came to my mind. How good can one individual be? I've got a presentation tomorrow and it's about a team collaboration, and I wonder how much we really focus on working together to use skills from groups of individuals, and how much we're expected as academics to be good at everything, which you patently can't be, which leads to burnout and the feeling that you're not quite achieving anything very well. So I'll just throw that back to you.
Quite a few themes I'm hearing in there. One, I had to learn how to stop saying I and start saying we. And I'm in a school of exercise and nutrition sciences, so there's a bit of competitiveness that can arise there. It's unusual for academics, I know. And so part of that, I harnessed it by just allowing the adventurers, I call them, to go off first and then get them to tell their stories and then encourage others. But others are less confident. We formed learning teams, and around ePortfolio particularly, that was really vital. So they went through the modules together, met together every week to talk about the experiences they were having, so it was a blended process. But to be honest, people, I'm always got at least 4 gadgets with me. People think I'm a geek, but it's actually about empowerment. It's about having a voice. It's about having the tools to do what you want to do and to bring our scholarship into the practical world more easily and to work with our students more effectively. So I always try to look for how it's going to support the individual academic and ask them, what do you want to be doing more of so you love your teaching, and how can we do that? But we've got great leadership in the school that has put money where this, and employed me, an e-learning education developer and an assistant. So that was really vital. And I don't know if you've heard, Deacon's going through a big progression into the cloud, apparently. So that's helped as well because it's aligned with the whole of the institutional goals.
Hi, Jo Travaglia from University of New South Wales. So this isn't a critique of your work, but it's I guess a reflection on the whole field. One of the things that concerns me, as on page 5, is the sort of surreptitious evolutionary discourse of what's happening, as though, at the beginning all people did was learn facts, and now we're going into a new mode where we're creating knowledge and resources. And it kind of speaks to Tony's presentation earlier as well. In fact, people have been engaged in critiquing epistemology from the beginnings of philosophy. People are engaged, Bletchley Park is a really good example of engagement and collaboration at a time way before what we're talking about now. So I think one of the issues today and for tomorrow is the problematization of technology as a form of evolution in and of itself. They're tools, but for me it's really concerning that the representation of knowledge in this way kind of says, in the past, it's a bit like people tended to critique cross-cultural learning. So people from Chinese did surface learning, and it was, but the rest of us are all doing deep learning. So as a reflection, I just think it's something that I think we need to engage on to support what you're doing, not to critique what you're doing, but that representation of a nice evolutionary process that ends up somehow in a technologically driven form of collaboration, I just find somewhat difficult.
Yeah, look, I'll take your point, and I'll think about that. I guess we have classes with minimum 300 up to 2,000 students. So allowing students to create and use tools to think more and create more, whether that's through conversation or technology, is a challenge. And multiple choice questions, unless they're very well written, in my understanding, don't often achieve that. So I guess I'm a pragmatist. I'm doing my best to equip people with the skills and the ways of thinking to allow students to engage in more deep learning, and I've always got my eye on that. And I could talk to you about rubric design for months as well. So I'm not just focusing on the technology, but it's a very good point. I'll have to have a think about that.
What's your view on the pros and cons of, if you're looking to, educate up academics on digital learning, of getting an external geek whose strength is in e-learning and digital technologies versus a slightly geeky discipline expert who comes from within the culture?
I've sort of done both, and it's much better to be within the community. It's much easier. And my number one goal was to build trust and relationships and understanding of the context, so that then I could align what I was doing with what the needs of the individuals were. But my discipline's actually psychology originally, so I'm still not really in the discipline, but I'm in the vague sort of area at least, and I'm situated within the school, whereas when I was in a more central role, I wasn't able to be as effective. But Deacon's going through a process where they're sort of loaning out the 20 or so academic developers we've got in the central group to faculties to be more contextualised, and I think that's starting to work because we're getting to know each other better. They're listening to what we've got going on, and we're aligning our efforts. I don't know, what do other people have? How do you work with change in this area effectively?
My name is Dave McDonald. I'm from the University of Queensland, and we're going through a similar process now, trying to get staff to take on new forms of technology. What we did was, to be honest, we did both. We had the technology people at the uni have a series of meetings to look at what sort of things the staff were already using and sort of how they were structuring their course content. And then they could pick from thousands of different available technologies that they thought would be the best suited to help them move forward. And then it's just a series of driven workshops. So the first workshop is, here's some things we think that you might like. What do you think of that? And then after that is, so you've said you liked these things. Now we're going to go deeper into those things. So it's very much directed by what the staff have wanted. And we tried to make it as simple as possible so that it made everyone comfortable. You get a few wins under your belt, and then we kind of went from there. The thing that surprised me about this is I had the meeting with the technology people, and they said, yeah, normally we just have one meeting with the academic staff member, and we just sort of take it from there. And that really surprised me. I said, well, how do you know how to structure the courses? How do you know how to make it specific to your market? So we don't. We just throw it out there and see what happens. The feedback from the technology people and from the staff who attended was extremely positive. The technology people felt a sense of relief that, okay, we know this is kind of what you want, so that made them to make it more specific. And the staff people, again, felt that they were getting things that they wanted to use. Just whatever you think.
And we actually have both now. So I've got an e-learning assistant. So she makes stuff. So we have a model we offer to academic staff. I agree. I think flexibility and customising what you offer for academic staff is vital. So we say, do you want us to make it for you? Do you want us to show you, get you started? Or do you want us to just kind of help you when you get stuck? Some people prefer to do the adventuring thing and learn for themselves. Some people like to have somebody sitting with them, teaching them how to do it. And some people prefer to have someone do it for them. And at this stage, we can offer all of those. And I think that really helps to show that we're there to support them, not we've got an agenda and we're trying to get everyone to jump.
Okay, thanks. And it's great to actually follow up on Susie, because I want to address this problem, imagining, if you will, the university at the centre, just for the purposes of this, not saying the universities are at the centre, and imagine equity is kind of like you throw a stone in and the ripples spread outwards. And so Susie's already really covered. Implicit in what she's saying is that notion that, okay, we've now got students, and I should say from this point, when I'm talking about equity in higher education, just as a shortcut, I'm talking about democracy. I'm saying that universities should be accessible to all people regardless of what disadvantage they've experienced in their life. So you can first and foremost address that once they're in the university, and let's look at IT and say, how can IT help them get a great learning experience and maybe overcome some disadvantages, such as being a single mother and not being able to come to the university full time and having to work at nights or on weekends. And that's great, but it nonetheless assumes to some level that they have a certain degree of IT expertise and access to IT infrastructure. So then you do the next concentric ring out, and it's about, okay, people because of disadvantage may not have been able to go do year 12, or maybe they didn't get good grades. Can IT help there? Absolutely. And my university, just to take one example, but a lot of universities do it, we now have our enabling programs completely online. So a student can, free of charge, basically do the foundation program, do the 4 units in communication and science and research methodology, and be graded and be assessed and get entry into an undergraduate program. It nonetheless, though, assumes a certain degree of IT competence and access to IT. And then you can spread the ripple out even more, because universities are starting to work a lot more in the space of nurturing and supporting aspirations of students, and saying you're living in an environment where maybe that's going to be bashed out of you a little bit. So how can we do that? And Charles Sturt is working in that. They've accessed government HEP, higher education pathways and participation programs funding to develop effectively a MOOC. What's demystifying university? What's university like? Targeting the 15 and 16-year-olds and saying, don't be afraid, come to university. It is for you. It's not for someone else. Again, the assumption is the same. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit redundant in my style here, but it's the important point I want to make, that it assumes a level of IT, access to IT and capabilities with IT. So the elephant in the room is so much of what we do in the equity space isn't actually compensating for that disadvantage that exists. And we are public universities. We do have notions of public good. That is what separates us apart from very valuable but nonetheless private providers who have much more focused requirements or much more focused missions. And so if I had one criticism of what's happening a lot, the government is actually putting in significant money into overcoming educational disadvantage. But these programs and these partnerships are primarily being driven by the universities. And I personally would like to see these partnerships and pathways being driven by the community groups, who then go to the universities and say, this is the real issue for us, this is the real problem, and we need you to overcome and address it for us. And so that to me is the primary question, that a lot of what we do in this IT space, whether it's in terms of a new teaching methodology or infrastructure that we provide our students, or software we provide our students, a lot of the times we're preaching to the converted. We're dealing with students who notionally come from disadvantaged backgrounds, whether registered by their postcode or their ethnic status, or being from a non-English speaking background. But the reality is they're the ones that have already successfully straddled about 90% of the hurdles. And we're dealing with the elite disadvantaged, if you will. And I'd like to see universities doing a lot more right back at source in the early developmental years, and working with community groups to address IT disadvantage there.
Who should take responsibility for technological preparation and infrastructure to support individual students' learning? You've got 3 choices. You can vote for once. The student, the university, the community. Actually, for the government. Okay, who votes for this? It's the student's responsibility, or the student should have some responsibility. Okay, who votes for the university should be responsible, or have some responsibility? The government? Yeah, stick it to. And the community? Yeah, the community. Okay, interesting. Questions, please? Yes.
20 minutes up the road at a little village called Coranda, students still have only dial-up speed. So it doesn't actually matter what the university does, because the NBN isn't coming anywhere close to us anywhere soon, apparently. So the promise about technology in all kinds of areas, health and everything else in our region, is severely compromised by the fact that actually most people, whether elite disadvantaged or not disadvantaged at all, don't actually have access to the pathways to be able to get to us in any kind of virtual space. So I just wonder what your comments about that might be.
I guess my response to that is absolutely true, and I think that what's being suppressed in, and maybe following along what Tony's talking about, what's being suppressed in the new world of universities is the service element and advocacy element. So universities, having a dial-up speed parameter, universities have 2 choices. The system is increasingly designed towards universities saying, I'm going to apply a competitive grant, research grant, to investigate how to ameliorate that disadvantage, and spend lots of money, most importantly in generating high quality research outputs in ACR journals, as they're called. Option 2 is to say, well, we know what the problem is, the university should act as an advocate as a voice for this community, and say, you know, instead of giving you that research grant, and use that money to actually put it into that area. Now, the reality is that a farmer benefit would occur in a second, but performance measures of higher education sector encourage researchers to go first. And I think that, and again, it's lovely when you come with your own ideas and then you put it other people's. That's where the resistance is. I think you can work and say, you know, I don't need that grant, I need to use that money.
Yeah, my name's Ruth, by the way. Hi. I was going to say something very similar. I'm very involved in a very large project that is working out in the back blocks, and exactly the same. None of our students can work on technology because there's no broadband coverage. But equally, because it's a very large partnership program between the university and some very big players, what's quite interesting is our university doesn't talk to any of the other players, or can't, by video conferencing, because the university's video conferencing is so advanced that Indigenous Coordination Centre, DEC and New South Wales Health can't talk to each other. So even on those very basic things, and when you're actually trying to raise a project, because you're completely right, people talk in terms of projects, and you know, oh, we'll get some funding for that, but where is it all coming together in very much those very big picture questions that Alan was asking about? You know, where is the coordination on this lot? Because it's all part of the same story somewhere. Yeah.
And it is a really massive problem. I was just speaking to some equity practitioners in Queensland, and they were saying that, you know, under the new government, that they had these really ambitious programs that had lifespans of 20 years, and then the government's just ripped out the money for it and it can no longer be sustained. Or they'd actually developed a VET Cert 4 program to enable people from universities, and then the local government changed the funding rules. So it's only Cert 3s are now subsidised by the government. So this very program designed to enable students to access higher education is now unaffordable for them. I think the only way that can be overcome realistically is that universities must work increasingly in cartels. And they must work altruistically. Because again, another problem is a lot of these programs are designed as point-to-point. So that high school, that disadvantaged primary school will use IT to get those students to our university. And then, of course, their performance and their evaluations measured on how many enrollments from that university. In fact, those students may be able to go to another university, and that's a fantastic outcome, but they're not rewarded for that. So the only way to overcome that is the universities to work with the cartels, that they can create enough of a mass that can hopefully ride these bumps. And that leads to the second thing. The only way they can then be sustainable is to take the hit themselves and actually run the programs, developing IT in this case, so that regardless of what happens with government policies, you are looking at government policies as being a boon to you. And skipping back again to our very first speech, that national $1.5 million capability, it's like if you can get universities to invest in enough critical infrastructure, is that whole joke, if you owe the bank $1, the bank owns you, if you owe the bank $1 million, you owe the bank. If we can get enough critical IT infrastructure into universities, it becomes too big to fail. And so from an equity perspective, I would then want to extend that one further and say we will develop that IT infrastructure embedded in communities as well, so that it becomes too big to fail.
I'm hearing a wish or a suggestion that students in the one instance, but the community and the other, if different, takes more responsibility for part of this problem. Maybe I misheard, or maybe that's my own bias, I'm not sure. But Tim, if you could explain a little bit more about how disadvantaged, marginalized, and otherwise unequipped segments of the population can express their needs more vocally, assertively, and persuasively when they may not have the mechanisms or or the experience and the confidence doing that. And the channels might not be open for that, even if they did.
Responsibility infers in it that the successes are yours and the failures are also yours. So I would rather use the word opportunity. We've got to give them the opportunity to speak. And that's where universities, I think, in this case, the higher education sector, can be a really useful conduit by basically saying, we can help you ask the right questions. So in other words, it's not the questions we want to ask, and it's that difference between, a student in the room saying, I'm not going to tell you the answer, I'm going to tell you how to be able to critically answer the question yourself. So we can definitely work with communities to say, here's the information, and here are the environment, and here are the democratic processes that we can sit you down in, and then act as an advocate and a voice for yourself. And I think that the answer, and it also ties back to the earlier statement about accountability. Accountability is a substitute many times for being able to accurately measure results. We can instead measure activity. So as a higher education sector, we can be a lot more active in that sense. And an example there is the centre's working with the government to develop an equity framework in higher education, and it's not just focused on higher education. In other words, students accessing it, being retained in the system, graduating from the system, but it's basically a relative thing saying, what are the early developmental indicators? What are the gap between rich and poor? What's technology access in Indigenous communities? That sends a baseline, and then you can say, based on that, are universities over or underperforming or over or undercompensating? So what we can do for those communities, I think, is we can gather the data and the information, and then we can actually go with them and talk to them, and then use that to help them reframe the questions. And if I did want to use one further analogy, it's what started as a good process, this is a personal opinion, started as a good process and ended in a bad process, was the Howard government's intervention into Indigenous communities. It started as a good process where they actually went into the communities and worked with them, and these people were honest and open and honest and talking about the problems in their communities because they were actually engaged with. And then that information was effectively used against them. And it was used to say that, look, you are the problem and we're now going to come in and fix the problem for you. So what I'd love to see is the first part of that process replicated in an equity environment. In other words, to say, here are the disadvantages, and we can only know what the real disadvantages and problems and potential solutions are by talking with you and helping you talk through these issues, because this is where we do have a lot of skill. Our background and our critical thinking and research allows us to say these are the right questions to ask. But then we've got to be unafraid where those questions take us.
The big brother phenomenon always be dangerous. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. In John's absence, I've put up his question here, and it's actually a really nice one for us to finish on. So can you three just swivel around a minute and have a look at the question? Because I'm going to ask you to briefly answer it each. Brief, as in 30 seconds. Okay, so just to get us started, in a way, it's easy to ask a question that's got a yes-no answer. It's much harder to answer it. So I would ask you to focus on the word should, and I'd like to replace it with could, because that would be easier to answer. And wherever. I have a bit of a doubt about making statements that are absolutely all-encompassing. So if we looked at the question of the capacity of technology for providing these opportunities, we'd all embrace the idea that this is a good thing. Should we focus on it? I think it's a matter of judgment. And should it be wherever? I think, again, we need to bring judgment, not just say yes. That's my opinion. Who'd like to?
I was first before.
Just finished talking.
Oh, look,
so
come
Susie,
on.
Susie.
It's your turn.
No, Susie.
Now we'll...
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I think the answer depends on what your question is. What purpose? What do you want students to reflect more on their placement experience? Maybe paper will do, but if they need to share it, then technology will be useful. You know, do you want them to describe the quality of their supervision in a hospital? Then blogging is probably not the right answer. So I think people always think I put technology first, but it definitely comes after the question of what are your learning goals, and maybe even what are your goals around creating relationships with the institution, the placement organisation. So that's the first point I'd make, and the second one is, and I understand the barriers are enormous for hospitals and for placement settings that aren't where people aren't using a lot of technology already. So.
I think there's a really profound difference between personification and actually applying technology to customise the learning experience of people. And the thing that we all need to pay attention to make that distinction is actually what do we know about the way people learn and how they learn. One of the tragedies of the last 30 or 40 years of innovation in technology is that those kids who don't have great access that live in the village actually haven't been done down too badly, because longitudinal studies of high efforts to use technology in schools has not shown that it really makes very much of a significant difference to kids' achievement, learning and outcomes. Bit of a heresy maybe in our environment, but nonetheless there's a very, very strong body of evidence that supports that. So the question becomes one of, how does it make people collaborate better if they want to collaborate? How does it help customise the learning experience? Access questions will not answer those. It's about us thinking very, very deeply about the intersection between what we know about technology and what we know about the way people learn and how they learn. And then to look at other fields which have managed to take their core activity, where technology has had a profound difference, and combine successfully what it is they know about their field and what they know about technology. That's an unanswered question in this field right now. So, yeah.
I really can't add much more. I would just say instinctively, I would say yes, they should be supported, but the qualifications are very much as my co-presenters have already covered, that it doesn't necessarily mean that it works in every environment and it's correct in every environment. I think that technology is not always the answer, but it should always be an equal opportunity. I get the easy cop-out. Whether it works or doesn't work, or whether it's good or bad, as long as disadvantaged students have equal access to its pitfalls and its benefits, I'm happy.